Good evening, and welcome to the Fireside reading series, brought to you by the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. I'm Peter Borgen, manager of the Hamlin Midway Library. The past couple of years have taken us away from the in-person gatherings that inspired the name Fireside, but we are still so pleased to be able to join you online to share the stories of our Minnesotan neighbors. Last year, hundreds of you gathered virtually for this series, and we are pleased to have you with us again. We look forward to the time that we can again gather at our library and share stories in person. We are excited to share with you that we are working with neighbors and community to create a vision to transform the Hamlin Midway Library into a space that meets the needs and wants of the whole community now and for the next generation. St. Paul Public Library has a bold, community-centered vision for its library buildings: to create spaces that are safe, inviting, affirming, and comfortable for people of all cultures, abilities, and communities. At the end of last year, Mayor Carter proposed and the City Council passed a budget that includes substantial investment to transform the Hamlin Midway Library. We invite you to co-create and co-design the library of the future. Visit our website, www.sppl.org, to learn more and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on opportunities to join in shaping the future of this location. We look forward to working with all of you.
Hey everyone, I'm really pleased to be here with you tonight after that wonderful setup from Peter at Hamlin Midway. I am Wendy Worden, the Programs and Services Coordinator for the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, and I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight. As we get started this evening, we would like to take a moment and acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land from which I'm broadcasting tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people as fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe peoples are the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. The Fireside reading series is the Friends' longest running program, celebrating 28 seasons in partnership with the Hamlin Midway Library. Fireside is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and special thanks to our newest sponsor, our neighbors down Snelling, Minnesota United. We're so grateful for your support and presence here this evening. We will begin with a reading from Tom and then open things up to questions from you. We will be following up this program with a brief survey to get your feedback, so do be on the lookout for that. I will also share a recording of the video if you want to view it again. We have partnered with Next Chapter Bookseller in St. Paul, and they have created a page with our featured books, and they will be providing sales at our in-person event at the end of February. So do check them out if you feel so inclined to pick up any of the books you hear about in this series. That is it from me, really. We're going to kick off our series this year with Tom Rademacher, and Tom is an 8th grade English teacher in the Minneapolis area. His book, It Won't Be Easy, An Exceedingly Honest and Slightly Unprofessional Love Letter to Teaching, was a finalist for the Minnesota Book Award. His writing has been published in Education Post, City Pages, MinnPost, and Huffington Post, and in 2014, he was honored as Minnesota's Teacher of the Year. And Raising Ollie has the honor in my household of being on the list of books consumed in a single day. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. Many more of you than I expected, and that's really awesome. I decided to move myself in front of my fire and light a fire, and I'm now realizing that the side of the fire is in fact a very warm place to sit. So we'll see how it goes. So yeah, I'm just gonna read one of my favorite sections from Raising Ollie. I don't, if you haven't seen it yet, they did such a great job on the cover, and it's my favorite thing in the whole world. There's a lot of little illustrations in here that came from Ollie's sketchbook. They integrated into the cover. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about, a time. So the book kind of covers a really important year. Ollie is my kid. And the book covers a year where Ollie had a pretty rough year at their school the year before, that kind of culminated in a choir teacher making fun of them in front of the choir class until Ollie eventually left in tears. And we ended up moving schools after that, not just for that, but for a lot of reasons. And so there was a kind of this kid that loved school, that loved learning, that all these things, all of a sudden hated school and was having just like a physical bad reaction to having to go. And this is that summer, we took a family trip to Denver. And so I'm going to read from that chapter just a little bit. So this is July in Denver. Before the stress of new schools started, we took a family road trip to Denver. The trip was exactly what we all needed, especially Ollie. Every mile we drove away from home, away from that year in school, seemed to bring a little life back to them. Every new adventure on the trip, except for maybe wall drug, which was useless, was a memory that pushed the anxiety-filled boredom and the teacher making crying eyes in front of the class a little further away from the front of Ollie's mind. A child of their generation, Ollie was accustomed to car rides that featured many glowing screens of videos, games, and various art-related apps. But on that trip, the longest car ride we'd ever taken, a trip that included driving through some of the more beautiful spots in our country and also Nebraska, Ollie left the iPad in its case most days. They looked out the window, sang along to Hamilton, played round after round of Would You Rather, and tried to spot license plates from every state. We did get them all, even Hawaii twice, not to brag or anything. Every so often, Ollie would spend time quietly staring out the window, lost in their thoughts. They would occasionally turn to us and ask a question. Sometimes it was about what would happen if a person ate only breadsticks for a year, or whether we thought they could build a car that ran like a music box, and what song would be the most popular song for a car engine. Sometimes they would ask about the new school next year, about what we thought about all the things that happened at their old school, about why the music teacher didn't understand how to help them, and how hopefully that teacher did now so that students next year wouldn't be treated like that. We'd answer, chat a bit, and then Ollie would go quiet. The little gears and springs and windy things turning away in their head, almost visible in the reflection of their eyes against the car window. Becca had a conference to attend in Denver, but pushed for the full family trip because she had wanted to show our child the Corn Palace since before we even had a child. Look, I'm never divorcing Becca. She's too wonderful. But if I did divorce Becca, the very first line of my case would mention her love of roadside attractions. If she ever divorced me, the first line of her case would mention just how funny I think I am. The most successful stop of the trip was yet another roadside attraction called 1880 Town, which is a fake Old West town built on a big flat field. And also there's a 50s style diner on a train car in the parking lot because, Becca loved it before we even got there. And Ollie was actually game for the whole thing, though they spent more than half the time chasing around a few cats that lived amongst the 2 cows that you could pay to pet. There was a little shop where you could rent costumes, which Becca made a beeline for once we got in. There's no point in being in 1880 Town and not dressing the part, right? My worry was that dressing up would only further encourage my least favorite thing in the world, which is people attempting to interact with me while they are in character and expecting me to play along. Becca was looking through all the big frilly dresses from adult to child size and asked Ollie if they wanted to dress up too. They looked at the dresses like they were sewn from eyeballs, disgusted to the point that they felt they needed to apologize to the woman who owned the shop for their reaction. It was right around that time that I was feeling just how crowded the shop was with old dusty costumes and people, and I excused myself to a rocking chair I'd spotted just outside the door, likely placed there specifically for grumpy dads like me. 10 lucky and glorious paid actor-free minutes later, Becca and Ollie emerged. Becca had on a dress that was a frilly explosion of purple nonsense and was followed by just about the most perfect little Western sheriff I had ever seen. Becca saw my surprise and explained Ollie saw the sheriff outfit and really wanted to wear it. They had tucked their long wavy hair under a black cowboy hat, a brown leather vest with badge, obviously, a red bandana tied around their neck, and a low-slung gun finished off the outfit. They spent the day swaggering around and pointing orange-tipped silver pistols at imaginary train robbers and posing for pictures and selfies, making cartoonishly large winks in front of old-timey stuff. When the costume was finally returned and the long hair came back out, they somehow looked a little less like themselves than they did when they were playing cowboy. When we got to Denver, to the hotel that featured a bathroom without spiders and beds that stay where you put them and pizza delivery, I was all set for a few days of laying around with Ollie while Becca went to work. On our first morning there, Ollie was unwilling to order pizza for our third straight meal, so we walked down the street to get some bagels. While we waited in line to order, a whole group of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles walked in with lanyards around their necks. As we looked at them, we saw Wolverine walking by with about 15 Deadpools, an Egg McMuffin in every hand. Dad. I think there's a con happening. They said this like, I don't know, there's nothing in the world like a nerd in the presence of other nerds meeting to do nerd stuff. And so it sounded just like that. We could have asked, of course, any of the costume people around us, but neither Olive nor I is ever very interested in talking to a stranger when something can be Googled. Sure enough, Denver Comic-Con was happening just 2 blocks away. Ollie was a fan of nearly every aspect of nerd culture, starting with an obsession for Steven Universe, a show about a young awkward boy trying to find superpowers, which was also a show about the fluidity of gender and the strength of many different kinds of love, and also monsters get punched in the face and stuff. There's much deeper lore to the world of the show, and Ollie knows it all, absorbing it on watches and rewatches of the series. They've also started gaming, preferring 2D games like Undertale that look like games from my childhood, but feature sharp humor, a gender-fluid main character, and a huge community of online nerdery devoted to its worship. Ollie loved all of these things and more, collecting new fandoms from friends at school and YouTube rabbit holes. A con was very high on the wish list, just under a trip to Japan. I'd never been, but the timing was too perfect to pass up. I made them promise to help me get our laundry done and clean out the car, which appeared to have lived through the last 30 minutes of a Mad Max-style post-apocalyptic movie where the only food available was found at gas stations. And then we would spend as much time as they wanted during the following day going to Nerdfest. The line to get in the next day took us an hour to get through. An hour that Olive had almost no trouble with, as they spent the time spotting cosplay from various obscure Steven Universe fan favorites, anime series I don't know about, and characters from Undertale. While we waited, I looked through the convention app on my phone, found appearances of celebrities and creators that we could go to, panels of actors talking about some aspect of fandom. Honestly, there were some pretty cool ones and some pretty big names. I kept rattling them off to Ollie, who was wholly uninterested in them. Okay, so maybe the marketplace that has like a ton of games and toys and gifts? Nah. So what do they want to go to first? Artist Alley. Oh, and there it was at the very back of the bottom floor. This isn't where the big name comic artists go because they have their own section with big booths and signings and all that. Artist Alley is for independent artists and DIY crafters who set up shop to sell their stuff. A large portion of it is fan art, their interpretations of beloved characters and imagined crossovers. There were some particularly cool Hamilton Star Wars posters. Anyway, so Ollie wanted to start there and see some artists arting. It was 2 aisles long, and I figured we'd be done in about a half an hour. We stayed for 8 hours. 8 full hours, looking at art, talking to artists, asking questions about the artists and their art, and spending a few $100s on all the things that just must have been had. We took one break for lunch, and Ollie spent that time on their iPad drawing. It reminded me of those artsy kids who went to poetry readings at coffee shops and spent the time writing their own poetry. I'm guilty of this. Well, Ollie was a lot less obnoxious than that, but they were just so excited. I'm going to skip a whole lot of excitement. Once we were home, we got home just in time for Ollie's birthday. There were only 2 things that Ollie really wanted for their birthday. Every year before this, Becca had sewed Ollie a dress for their birthday. Their first birthday dress was blue and sparkly and had a felt owl and a star from Ollie's favorite YouTube version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star that had Velcro on the back and they could be moved around. The year before this, Ollie had designed their own dress, a white frilly thing with a rose that wound up the side. This year, Ollie wasn't interested in a dress and asked instead if Becca would help them make their first full cosplay. Becca outdid herself, and with faux gold buttons and piping, tall brown boots, and a blue fitted long coat, we had a rather convincing looking Hamilton for the day, and any day after that they could think of an excuse to wear it. The other thing they asked for, which went well with the costume, was a haircut. Specifically, they wanted their hair short enough to style into a mohawk when they wanted, or kind of sweep to the side when they didn't, and the sides and the back of their head shaved close. We took them to the stylist right by Becca's office, overlooking the park where Twin Cities Pride Fest was just beginning to set up tents and stages. The guy who owned the shop was an old rockabilly type who sells vinyl in the room next to where the hair is done, or at least he has them available for sale. I've never actually seen anyone shopping there. He started by putting Ollie's hair into a ponytail, then taking scissors and snipping the whole damn thing off. I actually expected Ollie to cry, but no, they saw him hold the ponytail up and let loose a triumphant, "Oh, yeah!" When we left the shop, we had Ollie stand in front of some big green plants nearby. They were wearing an olive green jean jacket, white tank top, jeans, and sneakers to go with their newly shaved and styled hair. You know those magic eye posters they used to have in the mall? The idea was you would stare and stare at them through all the blurs and noise and shapes. But only when you relaxed your eyes just right, a crystal clear image would emerge. It was just a haircut, yeah. But in that moment, Ollie looked more clearly like themselves than I had ever seen.
Thank you so much for reading also my favorite part of the book.
Another fire. Man.
Yes, maintain your fire. It's important.
Yeah.
It's the only fire we've got right now.
All right. There we go.
All right. We've got some questions from the audience already. I took some questions in advance from registrants. I think we can definitely get started with some of what you got into in the book. You got into this in a little bit in the book anyway, but I think this question about Ollie consenting to the publishing of the book and that the ethics of writing about a non-binary child and all of these things. It was a question that got asked by several registrants as well in varying versions of this format. So I think
that's
a
great one. Thank you for the question there. Yeah, I mean, that was a really big part of it. So I certainly didn't I didn't set out to write to write a book about Ollie. My first book was very, very much a it was just more of a like a advice for teachers kind of book, and I had in my head like the logical sequel to that, and I just kept writing it, and it kept not kind of happening. It just I just didn't, I don't know, it wasn't working. And then I started writing a smaller piece about what it was this summer that we were going through, of finding a new school and what finding a new school, that process was like. And Ollie kind of started getting talked about in that way. And then all of a sudden I realized I just kind of had more and more stories to share about being a dad and raising this kid and what it's done in my life. And all of a sudden I was at, 15,000 words for something I thought was going to be 500. And I decided to just kind of go for it. And, Ollie right off the bat was really, really supportive of it. So they were in the writing of it. It was about, a year, 2 years after the year that I was writing about. But they had spoken a few times in different places and had become a bit of an activist in their own school, and really were excited about the story being shared. Becca, my wife, was decidedly less excited. She's a therapist and is a much more private person than I am. And so I started writing with the idea that like I could write this book, and in the end, both of them had, ultimate veto power. If the book became something anyone was uncomfortable with, I'd stick it in a shelf, never look at it again, and that would be fine. And we certainly did some things. So the biggest thing we did is that my child's name isn't Ollie. They certainly picked that name and really like it for the book, but we definitely didn't want, if you Google Ollie Radmacher down the line, you're not gonna find my child. So that was like a piece, and then we've also kept them. There was one interview that they've done so far in relation to the book, and it was a newspaper interview that we did over the phone. So we've not been including images or voice or anything like that, as hopefully just like another boundary there. And again, they're really pushing it. They really want to be out there, and we're trying to remember how big there's like some big jerks out there. And so we're doing our best to like juggle that. And then my own personal thing also was Ollie's a really good writer, and I want them to be able to write their own book. And so I didn't want to write any part of their story. So the book is very much the story of me raising them. So I can't pretend they're not involved. But it is more my story than theirs. I tried really hard not to tell the story from their point of view at any point, and shared things that really I don't think I shared anything that they were I know I didn't share anything they were uncomfortable with, because I talked with them every step of the way. So yeah, there was just a ton of conversations with the family, and my press, the University of Minnesota Press, and my editor Eric especially, were completely on board for that, and also had that kind of those lenses on of how do we make sure this book is what it should be and is the best that it can be, but also is comfortable with where we're at. So on the spectrum between I don't know, writing stories about dragons and not my family, and having an Instagram account where my kids are the stars every day, like we picked where our family was comfortable.
So, yeah, fantastic. It's a good response, and it also, as a former child who wanted to be the star of everything, I was like, oh, maybe this kid is just going to be out there, and I'm totally comfortable with that, and I can believe that, but also it actually feels really good as a grown-up with nieces and nephews to be like, oh yeah, keep some space. So that's, I really appreciate that. And
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
yeah, it's a great question. And I think may segue quite nicely into one that I have. I would love your take on why some of us, myself included, like to work out answers to our big questions about life by unspooling on the page and bouncing around inside of those questions in longer form work.
Yeah, I mean, there's the book is very much about things I've learned from raising Ollie, but certainly the writing of the book was an incredibly informative process as well for me, in that way of this year involved so many different things, from finding that Ollie was a highly gifted academic kid, but also had a lot of anxiety, and also in the very beginning of the year began using they and them pronouns, and also I was changing schools to a whole different school and a whole different kind of stuff, and I think that's partly why the stories, why I kept pulling in all these different threads, where I realized I couldn't write about being a dad without writing about my dad, and then that opens up a whole other thing, and then I think there was just so many questions that I was like living that I hadn't figured out yet. And it actually, like, the first draft of the book was really messy. But it was almost all the same writing. And then it was, I took a weekend at one point and just like, it wasn't written chronologically. It was written a little bit more by theme or by idea. And I took a weekend and just like reorganized the whole book into a chronological story. And then all of a sudden, a lot of the ideas suddenly started to make more sense to me too. And like, it really helped me figure out a lot of the stuff that I was living with.
I love that process of, I don't know, throwing it all on the floor essentially and figuring out exactly where the arc lines up. And it's always, I don't know, and it's good for me to hear that from other people who create. And I would like to share at this point some enthusiasm from Betsy, who has a book club, who's been reading Raising Ollie and wondering how you're doing teaching during this challenging this mess we find ourselves in.
I mean, I think I'm sure people have had this experience of just like when we see anyone for the last 3 years, and someone asks how you're doing, and you're just like, I don't know, as good as you as good as you can I be, I guess, and that's kind of what I feel like. Is my school has been really good about things. The kids have been fantastic. My colleagues are really good, and it's the worst. So that's a lot. And I also see Carolyn Holbrook there, whose granddaughter is one of my very favorite students of all times, if not one of the most ridiculous students I've ever had. In my very, very first year of teaching, I think, like 15 years ago. Anyway, so hi there. Yeah, I'm thankful that my job is steady. And I think a lot about people that are working in any kind of healthcare who didn't have like the summer off. And so I'm thankful for so many things. And also like, yeah, it's not great.
A friend of mine who teaches in Duluth just posted a video of unboxing more and more rapid tests. Like, this is how it's like. This is what we're doing.
Yeah, my school gave away, I think, 600 rapid tests to families yesterday, which was really cool. I walked in and saw the huge pile of them and came this morning, and there's like 30 left. It's like, all right, good. Like, let's
good. Move them out.
That's what we're doing now. Yeah.
Carrie is asking, can you compare the writing process from your first book to writing this one, and was one easier than the other?
Yeah, the first one was 1,000 times easier, because even though my first one was like, it was personal and I told a lot of embarrassing stories and stuff, there's a chapter in this on like anxiety that man, I hated editing that thing. I hated rereading it. I hated writing it. I like, and the fact that it was about my family and the added tension there of really wanting to get that piece right. It felt like way riskier and way harder. That said, I think the process as far as writing this one from the last one, this one, there was so many parts of it that were also like so much more delightful to write. And times when I wrote something, it was like, oh, I really kind of like, out of the first couple readers I got that were like, oh my God, like, I love your family. Like, I love Ollie. And I'm like, that's, I say like in the introduction, like apparently my books, 2 books so far are both, love letters. And this one's really a love letter to my family. And when that comes across to people, it's so cool. And I'm so glad that like, that comes through really well. So I think that piece of it was really neat, and to be able to write, about the people I'm closest to in that way was really cool. And this one I think was written in a much more condensed time frame as well. That first book was kind of thoughts and ideas over 5 years of really trying to figure out and convince myself that like I'm a person who could write a book. And then I did it once, and so I was like, all right. And then it became like tackling like a solo project and really digging in on it.
Yeah, I am interested also in this process of writing about family, and I don't know, you don't need to convince anyone, you just need to do it. But convincing people that writing about family is in fact an act of love and an act of expressing that emotion for them is just, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've had family members be like, you could write mysteries. Like, I could. Unfortunately.
And yeah, I mean, I learned my lesson really early when I was in college. It was like one of the first poems I ever got published anywhere, and also probably one of the last poems I ever got published anywhere. It got published in like this really small journal in Seattle, and I was living in Minneapolis, and I had written a poem about my dad that mentioned that my dad had driven while drunk, and it was not a delightful portrait of my dad. But I was like, well, it's gonna get printed on 50 pieces of paper in Seattle, like, we're good. And I mean, it was like 4 days after it came out, my dad called me because one of his cousin's kids was somewhere in Seattle and saw it and saw the last name and matched it to the whatever, and it was just like instantly busted. Yeah, so it's, I think maybe that was I think I took a break for a while on family after that. But
I mean, you can't always do it, I suppose, but it is just, this book really did drive that home. This is an act of love for your family, but also for the community that you serve as an educator, and how that idea of family and community intersect in really meaningful ways. I am going to dig up more of the questions from our lovely registrants. This one I liked because it's also near and dear to me. Tell me about this conversational writing style full of asides, and how are you getting away with it? And what's the editing process like?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It's just always been, even when I wrote poetry, I wrote pretty conversationally. And I think it was kind of the books. My dad instilled in me this like absolute love of Kurt Vonnegut. And so that was like a lot of what like put my brain together while I was reading, I think. And to me, it always felt like he was very clear that like you should write in ways that people will understand, right? Like your writing is for people. Like you're supposed to be, I can't remember the phrase, like delivering comfort and joy at the top possible speed, something like that, I think was in Cat's Cradle. And like, so I think that's always been a piece of it for me, is like, you know, I want my books to feel like conversations, or I want my essays to feel like conversations. And yeah, I mean, like, thankfully, when I was shopping that first book around, I had talked to a few different presses about it. Who, there was like one press that was like, it's a book about teaching and a book about race, but we just want a book about teaching. So if you get rid of all the race stuff, that's fine. And so like I told, you know, that was a no. And then I sat with Eric Anderson from the University of Minnesota Press, and he was like having coffee with me as a favor, where he was just kind of like, yeah, we don't do like teacher books. We don't do, like, that's not really our thing. What I'm really looking for, I think, would be a basically, like, what do you call it? I'm not gonna get the word. Basically, like, you know, he's like, I want a teacher book with swears in it. Like, I want a teacher book that talks about how teaching sucks, and I want a teacher book that's like, you know, whatever. And I hadn't pulled out my manuscript yet, but at the time, my first book, the working title of it was Welcome to the Shit Show. And so like, he was like, I know, I don't really want like a teacher book, I want whatever. And I pull that out, and he's like, all right, okay, we're interested. And like, and they've just been incredibly, they rein me in for sure, when I'm getting a little too delighted in myself. But you know, like, even in proofreading, they work with someone who they're like, hey, this isn't gonna hit every grammar rule perfect. And like, and my proofreader has been amazing. We use the same person for both books, and like, yeah, it's just this understanding of like, sometimes the story and sometimes the voice overrides the rule, which is a cool place to get to write from.
Yeah, I really like that sense of, this is what you find the voice that the story needs, and this one, and perhaps your first book, which I admit to not having read, but now I'm but anyway, I'm going to also say, folks who are raising your hands, you can just drop questions into the chat. That's how we're running stuff tonight. So yeah, thank you for your interest, though. Yeah, this is a good one, Katie. It's definitely a question that I had too, about, you know, the anxiety of teaching and professional reception of the work, and, you know, sort of balancing that that interpersonal, you know, yeah, that interpersonal anxiety with what you do professionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I might just be broken in that way, where like for a long time I considered myself like I'm an introvert, but I consider myself like a digital extrovert. So like on Twitter, I'm super extroverted, and I think my writing is a piece of that too. Like it's where all my stuff comes out, but like I'm far more likely to be personal and honest in a written piece that will go out to the whole world, than I am to like, well, sometimes like to my wife when she's sitting right next, like she'll be like, hey, I saw on Twitter you weren't feeling really good today. So like I think that's just a part of me, but also I think that other one, that like how do I deal with the anxiety of it. I mean, the biggest thing for me, and like and I've felt burned on this when I didn't do it, to me the most important piece of writing is honesty, and it starts with being really honest with yourself, both of like what you want to write and why you want to write it. And every time I've tried to write a piece that like I thought would, I don't know, not like accomplish something, but I was like kind of writing it to show off the writing of it or whatever. Anytime I got away from like my core values of why I was writing and what I was writing, it's always gone really poorly. And that's when it's with the worst. And then with this book, like knowing that people are going to read it and not like it, or hear about it and not like it, or whatever, just knowing that like it's my own truth, and I'm comfortable in that truth. Sorry, I giggled in the middle there because I saw the what is a way to remember the preferred pronouns for Ollie. And I asked them at one point, I think there was another one up there about advice for allies of young gender fluid kids. Is that okay if I grab questions?
Oh yeah.
Take away. Okay.
I've muted myself, but I've got some resources that I'm also prepared to
Great.
attach to an email that I send out with the survey and everything, because I anticipate when we have events that sometimes, please advise me is a thing that happens. But go ahead. Please.
Yeah, and I like transforming families is a really, really good spot too if you're someone who has a young person and you're anywhere in that process, I guess. That's been a really great community. But I think the big one is, so for like for me and Becca now, Ollie has used they and them pronouns for 4 years. And at first, certainly it took a second, not more than a second, right? Like we got it wrong a lot, right? We used their old pronouns quite a bit. And what we found is that practicing when they weren't around was the most important thing. So like at night after they had gone to bed, we would like talk about them very intentionally using their pronouns. And what was really interesting about that is that, one, it got us more used to using them, but two, it also like helped rewire our brains, where I don't see Ollie as having the gender they were assigned at birth anymore. And when people use she and her for Ollie, it automatically rings untrue to me. And what's kind of interesting is that in the book, as they started really taking on that identity, they would tend to dress like I was describing, with the undercut shaved hair that all their other non-binary friends also got all at the same time too. And but they've started getting really into different kinds of fashion, and there'll be days where they'll wear really frilly skirts, and really like feminine or femmy things. But because we've been, because the language and the practice, I still don't see them and say like that's a girl, and they don't feel that way. Like in fact, they're just so comfortable in their identity that I think now they're willing to explore the presentation of it in lots of different ways. So yes, practicing was really big. Practicing helped rewire things. At one point I had a friend who asked me, their kid had recently told them that they were also non-binary, were using they them pronouns. And my friend was asking for help. And I asked Ollie what they thought. And Ollie's response was, when you're talking about your kid, just imagine, what did they say? Imagine they're a swarm of bees. And then just use they and them in all those ways. And I don't know why that's a thing. It's apparently a thing all over. It's apparently a non and it's the swarm of bees thing killed me. So so they just said that, and like it actually helped him for, he just kind of like in his head, even though it's a singular they and them, it's used in language like it's a plural in many ways. And so like just kind of seeing their kid as a whole bunch of bees and saying they them really helped them for some reason. It's a ridiculous thing, but that's true.
I adore the swarm of bees analogy. It is one of my very favorite things, and I really it's just really fantastic. And also there's in my neighbor's yard, there's always a crowd of tweens with undercuts running around, and so it's just very
and the kids are great, man. Like it's one of the first things I got to do for the book, and this is where like I don't know, it's just this will be like the thing I always think of, I think, is I got to, because the book came out, the press was trying to get people to talk about it. So there was an NPR thing. Angela Davis had a show about raising gender fluid, gender expansive, gender creative kids, and I got to talk a little bit, but they brought in a whole bunch of really super like actual experts and people who were really smart, and it was really great. But at one point someone called into the show, and this woman called in and talked about how I think she said she was in her 70s and had only in the last year lived as a woman and lived fully and out as a woman. And she talked about like how it is people like Ollie, like how it's young people that are changing the world into a more accepting place, so much so that she felt comfortable like living her true self. And like that's just like watching Ollie and their friends together, and like the level to which and they're kids, they're growing, and so like sometimes pronouns will switch and names will switch and it'll be a new thing, and like the level to which they're just kind of like, oh, that's that now, cool, anyway, like off they go, and they just like celebrate each other. But it's just like this like this wonderful, beautiful way of like a million different ways to represent yourself instead of just these two,
Yep. It's really glorious. I really appreciate what I see from my neighbor kids, from my niece who's college age, and just all of the things that I think that I would have been better for as a woman who's now in her 40s, experiencing it would have been great. So we work with it now. But so thank you for sharing that. And to all of the parents and grandparents who have registered for the event and who are trying to be supportive and human beings to their family members. It means the world. So
yeah, and I think it's fair to know that like grief is a really strong word there, but like there's almost like a grieving process of the child you were raising suddenly not being the child that you were raising. And I think it's just really important to, like, you can have that feeling, you can have that struggle, you can have that hurt of it or whatever, but you just don't want to put that on them, you know, like you don't want to put that on the child. That's not their deal to have to worry about that.
Yes.
I'm trying to make the pet cameo happen.
Pet cameo. Pet cameo.
She knows I'm not. She knows I'm trying to show her off. She's not gonna do it. Nope.
Shy puppy. And I think one of the things that you wrote in the book that really registered with me on this front was the phrase affirm identity without making it look like work, and that you were really showing that through your interactions with students and with family, and thinking about the ways that you show up in the classroom for students of different ethnicities and students of different gender presentations, and how you're then working with your white colleagues on that, and how difficult those moments were. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about that portion of the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a piece of, you know, when I'm thinking about what it is to raise a kid, you know, Ollie is a lot of things. Like I said, like they're an artist and they're non-binary and they're gifted, and they're also like a white kid, you know, and so like part of that process of raising them has to be like, also, what does it mean to be raising a white person in this world? And that's something that teaching has been incredibly important for me, to like kind of live those questions and live that journey. And also, like, it's so frustrating how much work there is to do yet. And so the switch that I did in the book is I had taught at schools that were specifically like racial integration schools and specifically anti-racist schools. That's like what I came up in as a teacher. And the school that I switched to 4 years ago, it's a kind of more typical suburban school, and in fact it's the school, we have our parking lot kind of is shared with a police department, and that police department were the ones responsible for killing Philando Castile. So the year before that I came to that school was a year full of protests and stuff outside of the school, and a community that was being divided by, you know, Back the Blue signs and Black Lives Matter signs right next to each other, and a majority white student body that was getting increasingly racially diverse. And, you know, that's kind of what I walked into that first year, and all of a sudden the conversations that I had been used to like doing and getting mostly just rewarded for as being like a white guy who was trying, as bad as I might have been, all of a sudden there was a lot more friction than I was used to from, you know, both students but also colleagues and community, and also it helped me realize like I've got some things to say to the white guys, and white guys have some things that we need to hear and things that we need to talk about and conversations that we need to have, both in like a racial way and also like in the chapter about like sex education and consent and stuff like that. Like, you know, that needs to be an important part of what I'm putting out there, I think, is like the work that needs to happen.
I appreciate that I appreciate that you're going there. Come on, dog. and now.
Do you see how much she hates it? She hates it.
What is dog's name?
That's Berta.
Okay.
It-
Goodbye.
so bad.
Oh, goodness.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
It's also like when I'm teaching at distance, it's like my only thing that I do is just like, there needs to be dogs. Bring me dogs. Bring me.
Yep.
That's a little bit, but bring me dogs.
Yeah. Is briefly before we wrap up, is there anything you would like to share? I think, you know, reading from the portions that you meant, that you brought up around things that white guys need to say to white guys. and white ladies need to say to white ladies.
I mean, that's just not. I can look that it feels like so much that is like every part of that is a start of a pretty big conversation.
It is delightfully, it's through the book, Len, and I think it I'm trying to remember what it is that my husband said about this. Hi, Brian. I think you're sitting in the other room watching. So, but just the way you're telling a story, but the story is not separate from discussing the important things that you're living as an educator in a city that is growing increasingly racially diverse and has moments of incredible tensions, as you know, exemplified almost too metaphorically by a school sharing a parking lot with a police station. Like, that's just
yeah, it's a lot.
So
yeah, I mean, I there, you know, there's that the stuff about race specifically is the stuff that probably is some of the most standalone stuff in the book. But yeah, I don't know if there's like a short part, but a lot of it's just like, you know, like my experience is growing up as like a dumb suburban white boy who felt scared about being a white boy and not having a lot of really good models and not having a lot of good places to learn, you know, what that would mean in the world. And then very, very thankfully finding really good friends in college and finding honestly, like students like Carolyn's granddaughter who that first year were willing to put up with a really ignorant dude in the front of the classroom and really slowly and carefully explain things to me that I did not understand. And, you know, and then, but also like, but recognizing that I teach 8th grade and 8th graders just aren't done yet. Like, they're not done cooking yet. So, where like the obvious Twitter reaction to some things is like, shut that person down and like ostracize and all these things. It's like, you know, the 8th graders make dumb jokes and say dumb things. And a lot of times it's a really good time to jump in and not push them further down the rabbit hole of like 4chan or wherever they're finding their awful YouTube alpha male stuff, right? Like, it's a really good time to be like, I get the appeal of that, but like, let's give you some more paths to go down.
Yeah. I am really, really grateful for you sharing your parts of your life in your book and sharing your time with us tonight. I'm really grateful for the attention of the audience and the excitement that they're all sharing around the book. Again, at the end of February, the last Saturday in February, we're going to meet in Hamlin Midway Library's front yard for a little bit of warm beverage and book signing. So I hope you can join us then, and I hope the weather will cooperate. I will be in touch with everyone. So that is happening, and I really look forward to spending time in community with Fireside friends. And so thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Hamlin Midway, for your constant support in this endeavor. I will send out a follow-up email with that survey and some various resources that I collected for questions about gender, because I knew there would be several of them. So
Yeah,
thank you
everybody.
everyone. Hi, Amy. Just noticed you. Thanks,
Yeah,
Peter.
great questions and great conversation. Thank
Yep.
you so much.
All
It was delightful, really.